The evening air of downtown Manhattan carried with it the scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart and the heavy exhaust of taxis pressing through endless lines of traffic. Among the lights that dazzled the skyline and the rhythm of hurried footsteps on concrete, a small boy sat silently at the corner of a lavish restaurant's entrance. His clothes were torn, his sneakers worn to the sole, and in his hands he clutched an empty paper cup that bore the faint sound of a few coins clinking together whenever someone passed too close. His eyes were large, too large for his thin face, but they held something that money could never quite buy, an unyielding hope. He was black, no more than 10 years old, a boy whose life had already seen the harsher side of the world. For weeks he had been sleeping in shelters when beds were available or curled beneath staircases when they weren't. Hunger was his constant companion, gnawing at him louder than the horns of the city. That night, however, fate had set the stage for a meeting that neither he nor the man walking toward him could have ever anticipated. The restaurant was one of the city's finest, draped in gold-framed windows and velvet ropes that kept the ordinary from mingling with the elite. Luxury cars stopped at its doors as valets bowed to men in silk suits and women adorned with jewels. Among them arrived a figure whose presence was as commanding as the building itself. He was tall, his robe pressed immaculately, his beard groomed with precision, and on his wrist glimmered a watch that could feed a family for years. He was an Arab millionaire visiting New York for business, a man of influence and fortune. The crowd whispered as he passed. Some recognized him. Others only felt the aura of wealth that clung to his every step. The boy's stomach ached as he watched trays of food being carried inside the restaurant. Roasted lamb, saffron rice, and golden pastries dripping with honey. The scents teased him, tormenting his empty belly. His gaze followed the man in the robe, and with courage that only desperation could forge, he pushed himself from the cold sidewalk, shuffled closer, and tugged softly at the man's sleeve. "Daddy." The boy's voice was fragile, barely a whisper against the city's roar. "Can I eat with you, Daddy?" The millionaire paused, startled. He looked down at the boy whose skin was dark as midnight, whose eyes trembled with hunger, and whose body bore the marks of neglect. For a brief moment, silence wrapped around them both. The city faded. Only the boy's question remained, echoing in the millionaire's mind with a force that broke through the armor of wealth and power. The word daddy struck him deepest. He had children of his own, boys and girls who slept on silk sheets, who ate from golden plates, who never once had to wonder if they belonged. Yet here stood a stranger's child, a black homeless boy, addressing him with the intimacy reserved only for blood. The millionaire's chest tightened. It was not pity he felt, but a confrontation, a question larger than hunger itself. What do you owe to the dignity of another human being when the world has turned its back on him? The restaurant host had already stepped forward, eager to usher the millionaire inside, away from the awkward sight of a begging child. But the man lifted his hand, signaling him to wait. His eyes did not leave the boy's. "What is your name, son?" the millionaire asked, his voice calm, resonant, and carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. The boy hesitated, embarrassed. "Malik," he whispered. "And where is your father, Malik?" The boy's lip trembled. "I don't know. Mama said he left when I was little." "Mama, she's gone too." A murmur rippled through the people nearby. Some averted their eyes, uncomfortable at the rawness of the confession. Others pulled their coats tighter, quickening their steps, unwilling to be entangled in the ugliness of another's suffering. The millionaire's heart swelled with something unfamiliar in his usual circles of power, an ache that could not be satisfied by wealth. He thought of Malik's hunger, but also of the deeper hunger in his question, not only for food, but for belonging, for dignity, for the chance to be seen as someone worth sitting at the table. Then, without hesitation, the man did something that stunned the crowd. He extended his hand toward the boy. "Come, Malik," he said gently. "Tonight, you will eat with me." The boy's eyes widened, disbelief fighting with hope. "Really?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Really," the millionaire confirmed, his expression unwavering. Gasps sounded among onlookers as the Arab man led the black homeless boy through the velvet ropes, past the glittering entrance, and into the restaurant where no one who looked like Malik had ever been invited before. The chandeliers sparkled above, waiters in crisp uniforms froze mid-step, and conversations faltered into silence. The sight was jarring. A millionaire in pristine attire holding the hand of a ragged child whose clothes smelt of the street. The host rushed forward nervously. "Sir, perhaps you'd prefer." The millionaire's gaze cut through him, steady and firm. "Prepare us a table," he commanded. Within moments, the boy was seated on a velvet chair that swallowed his small frame. A napkin was placed on his lap, and crystal glasses filled with water sparkled before him. Malik sat stiff, unsure if he was dreaming. He glanced at the man beside him, still afraid this miracle would vanish. The millionaire leaned close. "Eat, son. Tonight, you are not invisible." When the food arrived, platters of lamb, fragrant rice, and fresh bread still steaming, Malik's eyes filled with tears. He hesitated, his hands trembling over the silverware. The millionaire noticed. He gently picked up a piece of bread, broke it in half, and handed it to the boy. "Bismillah," he said softly, blessing the meal. Malik took the bread with reverence, whispering, "Thank you, Daddy." Those words again, piercing, tender, undeniable. The restaurant's patrons watched, some with contempt, others with awe. But the millionaire did not care. He understood now that wealth was not measured by how much you owned, but by how much dignity you could restore to another. As Malik ate, the man asked him questions, not about why he was on the street, but about who he was. Did he like to read? Did he have dreams? What made him laugh? Slowly, Malik's guarded answers spilt into stories of a boy who once loved school, who dreamed of becoming a pilot, and who carried memories of a mother who sang him to sleep with gospel hymns. The millionaire listened intently, as if Malik's words were more valuable than all the deals waiting for him outside. He knew this dinner was more than a meal. It was a reclamation of humanity, a reminder that even in a world divided by race, class, and wealth, dignity must never be negotiable. By the end of the meal, Malik leaned back, his belly full for the first time in months. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, mimicking the manners he'd seen others use, and for a fleeting moment, he felt like he belonged. The millionaire placed a hand on his shoulder. "Malik, tonight you reminded me of something important. Money can build towers, buy cars, and even command nations, but it cannot give a man peace if he forgets the humanity of another. You're not forgotten, son, and from this night on, you will not walk alone." Tears slid down Malik's cheeks. He had asked only to eat. What he received was recognition, dignity, and a fatherly embrace from a stranger who saw him as more than a beggar on the street. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the transformation unfolding inside the restaurant. But for Malik and the millionaire, that night was not about food alone. It was about rewriting what it meant to sit at the same table across the boundaries of race, wealth, and power. And this was only the beginning of their story. The city outside roared with its usual indifference, but inside the restaurant, silence lingered long after Malik and the millionaire finished their meal. Waiters moved cautiously around them, whispering to each other in disbelief. Some patrons stared with quiet judgment, their gazes heavy with the kind of prejudice Malik had long grown used to. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to confront their own discomfort at seeing wealth and poverty, privilege and suffering seated at the same table. Malik noticed the stares. Each glance felt like a needle, pricking at his fragile sense of belonging. He lowered his eyes, his small hands folding nervously in his lap. "They don't want me here," he murmured, almost to himself. The millionaire leaned closer, his deep voice steady, commanding, yet unexpectedly gentle. "Listen to me, Malik. Never measure your worth by the eyes of those who do not see you. Tonight you are my guest, and if anyone here has a problem, it is with me, not with you." Malik swallowed hard, a warmth rising in his chest. No one had ever defended him with such certainty before. The man called for dessert, ordering baklava drizzled with honey and pistachios, a treat from his own homeland. When it arrived, golden and glistening, he placed the first piece on Malik's plate. "This," he said, "is a taste of home. Where I come from, sharing food is not only kindness, it is duty." To break bread with someone is to say, I see you, I honor you, you belong. Malik bit into the pastry, his eyes widening at the sweetness. For a moment, he forgot the cold sidewalks, the hunger, the loneliness. For a moment, he felt like a son again. When the plates were cleared, the millionaire motioned for Malik to follow him. Together, they left the restaurant, stepping back into the electric hum of the city. Malik expected the man to hand him some money, perhaps pat his head, and then leave him to the streets again. But instead, the man gestured toward a sleek black car waiting at the curb. Come, he said simply. Malik froze. Where are we going? To where you sleep. Show me. The boy's heart pounded. No one had ever asked before. No one had cared. He hesitated, ashamed of the truth, but the man's gaze held no judgment, only resolve. Malik led the way, weaving through alleys and side streets until they reached the back of an abandoned building. There, beneath a crumbling staircase, lay a thin blanket, a plastic bag with a change of clothes, and an empty water bottle. The millionaire stared at the scene, his jaw tightening. He imagined his own children in such a place, their soft beds replaced by concrete, their laughter smothered by the weight of survival. He closed his eyes briefly, as though steadying himself against the storm of emotions swelling inside him. Malik, he said softly, this is no place for a child. Not tonight. Not ever again. The boy looked up at him, fear and hope colliding in his wide eyes. Then where do I go? The man placed a firm hand on his shoulder. With me. Malik blinked. With you? But I don't belong. You belong, the man interrupted. His tone left no room for doubt. You call me daddy tonight. Do you know what that means? It means your soul was searching for someone to claim you, to protect you, to love you. Perhaps it was not an accident that we met. Perhaps it was written. Tears stung Malik's eyes, but he fought them back. Years on the street had taught him that showing weakness made you a target. Yet this man's words, this man's presence, chipped away at the walls he had built to survive. The millionaire opened the car door. Come, son. Tonight, you sleep in safety. Inside the car, Malik pressed his face to the window as the city blurred past. He had never ridden in such luxury before. Leather seats cradled him, the soft hum of the engine a lullaby against his exhaustion. For the first time in months, he felt his body relax. The man watched him quietly. He thought of the many times he had passed children begging on the streets of his own country, of the excuses he had given himself to look away. Tonight, there was no looking away. Tonight, the boy's question, "Can I eat with you, Daddy?" had shattered something in him and rebuilt it into conviction. When they arrived at the hotel, the staff rushed forward, bowing, addressing the millionaire with rehearsed deference. But their eyes flicked to Malik, and some faltered, their smiles thinning. The man noticed immediately. "This boy is my son," he declared firmly, his voice echoing through the marble lobby. "Treat him as such." The words hung heavy in the air. No one dared to contradict him. Malik looked up, stunned. Son. The man had called him son. Not beggar, not stranger, but son. In the suite, larger than any home Malik had ever known, the boy wandered in awe. Plush carpets muffled his steps, chandeliers sparkled above, and a bed bigger than a shelter's dormitory spread before him. He touched the sheets as if afraid they would vanish. The millionaire watched silently, his heart breaking and mending at once. He called for room service, ordering more food than Malik could imagine. As the boy ate, his small hands shaking with hunger and disbelief, the man sat across from him, reflecting. He thought of his own childhood, not one of poverty, but of discipline and expectation. He thought of the teachings he had memorized since youth, that true wealth was not in gold or property, but in charity, in giving without measure, in lifting the orphan and the oppressed. How many times had he recited those words? And yet, how rarely had he lived them with such clarity as tonight? "Malik," he said after a long silence, "tomorrow we will buy you new clothes. Tomorrow you will bathe and eat again and rest without fear. Tomorrow we will speak of your dreams. But tonight," his voice softened, "tonight you sleep as a child should, without hunger, without fear, without shame." Malik's throat tightened. He wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small, too fragile to capture what was happening inside him. Instead, he whispered the only word that seemed enough. "Daddy." The millionaire reached across the table, his hand covering Malik's. "Yes, son." That night, Malik slept in the softness of silk sheets, his body sinking into comfort he had never known. Yet more than the bed, more than the food, it was the presence of someone who saw him, truly saw him, that wrapped him in peace. The man stood by the window, gazing at the city lights. He knew this was only the beginning. Taking Malik into his care would not be simple. There would be questions, resistance, even backlash. But none of it mattered. The boy's dignity was not up for negotiation. And as dawn approached, painting the sky with pale light, the millionaire whispered a prayer only he could hear. That this boy, this child who had appeared like a question from God, would never again have to ask for a seat at the table. This was no longer charity. This was covenant. The morning sun spilt through the curtains of the luxury suite, painting the room in gold. Malik stirred slowly, his thin frame sinking deeper into the comfort of the bed. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The softness, the warmth, the faint smell of lavender on the sheets. None of it belonged to the streets. He sat up abruptly, afraid it had all been a dream. But then his eyes landed on the figure standing by the window. The millionaire, dressed immaculately, speaking softly into a phone in a language Malik didn't understand. Relief washed over the boy. It was real. He hadn't imagined it. When the man ended his call, he turned, his stern face softening at the sight of Malik awake. "Good morning, son." The word again, son. Malik clung to it like a lifeline. Breakfast arrived moments later. Fruits, warm bread, eggs, cheese, honey, and milk. Malik's eyes widened. He hesitated, waiting for permission, but the man gestured for him to eat. And Malik ate with the quiet desperation of someone who knew hunger too well. Afterward, they went shopping. Malik had never set foot inside such stores before. Clothes lined the racks. Shining shoes stood neatly displayed, and attendants hovered with polite smiles. But their eyes betrayed them. Malik felt their stares, felt the weight of their judgment as they glanced at his skin, his ragged old sneakers, and the contrast between him and the man who guided him. One attendant whispered too loudly, "Is he with him?" The words sliced through Malik. His hands trembled as he touched a shirt, suddenly afraid to be seen, to be rejected in this new world. The millionaire heard. His face darkened. He stepped forward, his voice low but sharp as steel. "This boy is my son. If anyone here doubts it, they can take their disrespect elsewhere." The attendants froze, shame flooding their faces. Malik looked up at the man, his eyes wet. For the first time, someone had defended his dignity not out of pity, but out of conviction. They left the store with bags full of clothes that Malik barely dared to call his own. On the way back to the hotel, Malik whispered, "I didn't want me there." The man placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me, Malik. The world will try to remind you of what you don't have, of where you came from, of why you don't belong. But remember this. Your worth is not decided by their eyes. It is decided by the God who made you and by the truth you carry inside. Do you understand?" Malik nodded slowly, though the sting of humiliation lingered. That evening, the story broke. A photo had been taken, an Arab millionaire walking into one of Manhattan's finest restaurants hand in hand with a homeless black boy. By morning, it was everywhere, tabloids, blogs, social media feeds. Some called it inspiring, a rare act of compassion in a world that so often turned away. Others sneered, accusing the man of publicity stunts and questioning his motives. Malik sat on the hotel couch, staring at the headlines. His chest tightened as he read comments. Some cruel, some racist, some dismissive. Street kids don't belong in five-star hotels. He's just using that boy for attention. What will happen when he gets bored of playing daddy? Tears burned his eyes. He threw the phone down and buried his face in his hands. "They hate me," he whispered. The millionaire picked up the phone, read a few lines, then set it aside. He knelt before Malik, lifting his chin gently. "No, son. They fear you. They fear what you represent, that a child like you, invisible on the streets yesterday, can sit at the same table as them today. They fear the truth that their comfort rests on ignoring boys like you. Do not let their fear become your shame. Malik sobbed quietly and, for the first time in years, allowed himself to be held. But the challenges grew heavier. That week, the millionaire attended a business dinner, bringing Malik with him. The event was filled with investors, diplomats, and men and women who moved millions with a signature. When Malik entered by his side, conversations faltered and eyes narrowed. One man approached the millionaire with a strained smile. "With all due respect, sir, bringing this boy to such an event may not be appropriate." The words dripped with condescension, veiled in politeness. Malik's stomach dropped. He wanted to disappear. But the millionaire rose to his full height, his voice carrying across the hall. "Appropriate? It is not appropriate that a child should sleep under staircases while we feast in halls of glass. It is not appropriate that the color of his skin dictates the measure of his welcome. If his presence disturbs you, perhaps it is your conscience, not the boy, that is out of place." Silence blanketed the room. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stiffened, unwilling to confront their own prejudice. But Malik's chest swelled. For once, someone had not only stood for him, but against the world that dismissed him. Later, as they walked back to the car, Malik whispered, "Why did you do that?" "They're your friends. Your business." The man looked down at him. "Because, Malik, no wealth is worth having if it demands I betray my own soul. And tonight you are my soul." Those words carved themselves into Malik's heart. Still, doubts gnawed at him. Late one night, he asked quietly, "Why me? Out of all the children you could help, why me?" The millionaire's eyes softened. He thought for a long time before answering. "Because you asked. Not for money, not for pity, not even for help. You asked to eat. You asked to be seen, to be called son. And in that moment, I realized I needed you as much as you needed me." Sometimes God sends us reminders in the most unexpected forms. "You're mine." Malik wiped at his tears, but a smile tugged at his lips. The days turned into weeks. Malik bathed, ate, slept, and learnt. His laughter returned, cautious at first, then freer with each passing day. The millionaire enrolled him in a private school, despite resistance from administrators who muttered about background checks and proper guardianship. But the man's influence and his unwavering insistence cleared every barrier. "If my son is not welcome here," he declared, "then my wealth will find a school where he is." Soon Malik walked through hallways he had never dreamed of, books in hand, his head held higher than before. Some students sneered, but others listened when he spoke, drawn to the quiet strength of a boy who had survived the streets. Teachers, too, noticed his sharp mind, his hunger not just for food, but for knowledge. At night, Malik often lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between disbelief and gratitude. He thought of his mother's voice, soft and weary, whispering prayers over him when he was small. "God sees you, Malik, even when the world doesn't." Now, lying in a bed of comfort he never imagined, he finally believed her. But even as Malik's life began to change, forces outside plotted against it. Not everyone celebrated the bond between a homeless black boy and an Arab millionaire. Some saw it as a scandal, others as a threat. Questions arose about guardianship, legality, and reputation. And soon, Malik and his newfound father would face a trial not of hunger or loneliness, but of justice, prejudice, and the power of truth itself. This was no longer only a story about one boy's hunger. It was about society's hunger for control, for division, for keeping people in their place. And Malik was no longer willing to stay invisible. The letter arrived one cold morning, sealed with the stamp of the city's child protection services. Malik watched nervously as the millionaire tore it open, his eyes scanning the words with growing tension. They were demanding an inquiry. Anonymous complaints had been filed, accusations that Malik was being exploited, used for publicity, and that the arrangement was improper. Some hinted at cultural prejudice, others at racial bias, but all carried the same message. This bond between a homeless black boy and an Arab millionaire was unacceptable in the eyes of those who could not understand it. Malik's stomach sank. "They're going to take me away, aren't they?" he whispered. The man folded the letter calmly, though his jaw tightened. He knelt before Malik, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. No, son. They may try, but I will not let them. Do you trust me? Malik nodded, though fear trembled behind his eyes. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, lawyers, and press conferences. The millionaire stood tall, his voice steady as reporters hurled questions. Why him? What do you gain from this? Isn't this a stunt? He answered with unwavering conviction. I gain nothing but the joy of being a father. This boy asked me to eat with him, and I chose to make him family. If the world cannot accept that love can cross wealth, race, and circumstance, then the world must confront its own blindness, not ours. Malik stood beside him, dressed neatly in his new school uniform, clutching the man's hand. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, but he held his head high. The hearing was scheduled. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. Social workers presented their case, speaking of concerns and proper guardianship. They cited Malik's background, the lack of blood relation, and the suddenness of the adoption-like bond. They spoke in cold terms, reducing Malik to a case file, a statistic. Malik shrank in his seat, every word cutting deep. To them, he was not a boy. He was paperwork, a problem to be managed. But when it was the millionaire's turn, he rose, his presence commanding the entire room. His voice was calm, yet powerful, echoing through the chamber. This boy is not a file. He is not a case. He is a human being. When I met him, he was hungry, not just for food, but for dignity. He asked me to eat with him. In that moment, I saw not just a child in need, but my own reflection. For years, I built wealth, power, and reputation. But none of it meant anything until I heard that question. Can I eat with you, Daddy? That was the voice of God reminding me of my responsibility as a man, as a Muslim, as a father to humanity. The courtroom fell silent. He continued, his gaze steady. If the law denies me the right to care for him, then the law itself is denying a child's right to be loved, to belong, to be protected. And I will fight that law with every breath I have. Malik's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, he saw a man not afraid of losing wealth or reputation, but only of losing him. The judge listened carefully, then turned to Malik. Do you wish to stay with this man? Speak honestly. The room held its breath. Malik rose slowly, his small frame trembling, but his voice clear. He's the first person who ever called me son. The first who saw me, not as a problem, not as trash, but as a boy who could be something. If you take me away, you take away the only family I've ever had. I don't want money. I don't want fame. I just want to eat with my daddy. The words broke through the cold walls of bureaucracy like sunlight through storm clouds. Even the judge's eyes softened. After hours of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Malik would remain under the millionaire's guardianship, with full legal protection. Tears streamed down Malik's cheeks. The man pulled him into a tight embrace, whispering, I told you, son. They cannot take you from me. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Malik, overwhelmed, clung to his father's hand. But this time he was not afraid. He had spoken his truth, and the world had heard it. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. The story spread beyond scandal and gossip. It became a symbol. Community leaders spoke about it in churches, mosques, and schools. Activists pointed to it as proof that dignity and justice transcended race and wealth. Letters poured in from across the world. Messages of support, of children who felt seen, of families who found hope in their bond. Malik's life transformed, not because of riches, but because he was no longer invisible. He studied hard, his hunger for knowledge growing each day. He volunteered in shelters, sitting with children who reminded him of himself, sharing food, not just as charity, but as kinship. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city skyline, Malik turned to his father. Do you think one day I can help kids the way you helped me? The man smiled, his eyes proud. Not one day, Malik. Today. Every time you speak, every time you live with dignity, you show the world that love is stronger than hate, that a boy from the streets can rise to become more than anyone expected. You are already helping. Malik leaned against him, the city lights reflecting in his wide eyes. For the first time, he believed not just in survival, but in destiny. Years later, when Malik stood at a podium, addressing a room full of leaders, activists, and children, he began with the same words that had changed his life. "Can I eat with you, Daddy?" The room fell silent, and Malik smiled gently. That was the question of a hungry boy. But today, it is the question of millions who only want to be seen, loved, and treated as human. And it is our duty to say yes. The applause thundered, not just for the man he had become, but for the boy who once dared to ask. Because sometimes a simple meal shared can ignite a revolution of dignity. And Malik's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to every child who had ever been told they were invisible and to every heart brave enough to see them.